The front door clicked shut behind Brian with that familiar final sound. Claire stood in the hallway, robe wrapped tightly around her, watching the taillights of her husband's car vanish down the wet driveway. Another business trip. Another week of silence in a house full of echoes. The silence felt heavier than usual. She turned toward the kitchen, flipping on lights as she passed, each switch echoing louder than the last. The house was clean, almost too clean. Everything was in its place, yet nothing felt right. The coffee pot hissed softly, filling the room with warmth that her marriage no longer gave. Claire Morgan had grown used to the quiet. Married for 7 years, the laughter they once shared had become small talk. Brian was still kind, still paid the bills, still kissed her on the forehead before leaving. But the man she married had become more of a figure passing through than a partner beside her. She poured a mug and walked to the window. Across the street, Derek Walker stepped out of his truck, a bag of groceries in hand, drenched from the sudden drizzle. Tall, with broad shoulders and the kind of effortless grace that made people pause. He looked up and caught her gaze. Claire startled. She hadn't meant to stare. But Derek didn't smirk or wave. He just nodded once, a calm, knowing nod, and disappeared into his house. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks. They had exchanged small pleasantries before. Wave here. A shared laugh over the neighbor's barking dog. Claire never lingered in conversation, but something about Derek always made her chest feel tighter. Back inside, she tried to focus. She folded laundry, watered the plants, put on music, but the hours dragged like molasses. She picked at her dinner, sat on the couch, and stared at her phone. No messages from Brian. No check-ins. Just as the rain started tapping louder against the windows, a knock came at the door. She paused. Another knock, more deliberate this time. Claire opened it slowly. Derek stood there, slightly wet, holding a paper bag. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice smooth and low. "But I baked too much bread, and I figured you might want a warm loaf on a night like this." Her lips parted, surprised. "Oh, that's very kind. You didn't have to." He shrugged with a half-smile. "It was either you or the trash can. I figured you'd appreciate it more." She laughed softly and stepped aside. "Come in. Just for a minute." Derek stepped inside, removing his shoes without being asked. Claire led him into the kitchen, and for a moment the house felt full again. He placed the loaf on the counter, still warm and fragrant. She offered coffee. He accepted. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them, light jazz humming faintly in the background. Derek was easy to talk to, disarmingly honest and genuinely curious. He asked, "Do you ever get lonely in this big house?" She hesitated, unsure if she should answer truthfully. But the words came before she could stop them. "More than I should admit." Derek didn't press. He just nodded, taking another sip. They talked about harmless things, books, travel, the weather. But beneath every word, Claire could feel something bubbling. Strange comfort. Dangerous ease. When he finally stood to leave, Claire walked him to the door. "Thanks again," she said, unsure if she meant the bread or the company. He looked at her, eyes steady but unreadable. "Anytime." She opened the door, the wind brushing past them like a whispered reminder. As he stepped outside, he turned back and met her eyes. "I'm just next door, Claire," he said. "You ever need anything? Don't wait for a knock." Then he was gone. She closed the door softly and leaned against it, heart drumming against her ribs. For the first time in weeks, she felt something. Not joy, not guilt, just the weight. And she wasn't sure if that scared her, or thrilled her more. The following day passed in slow motion. Claire kept herself busy, tidying drawers that didn't need it, wiping down already spotless counters. But her mind wasn't in the room. It was still at the door, still hearing Derek's voice. "Don't wait for a knock." She couldn't shake it. That night, the wind picked up. The rain returned, heavier this time, slashing against the windows like restless thoughts. Claire stood by the sink, staring into the dark backyard, holding a wine glass she hadn't yet sipped from. And then came the message. Just one. Still raining. Thought you might want something warm. Claire's breath caught. Her thumb hovered over the reply. The smart thing would be to ignore it. But it had been so long since anyone had checked in. Not out of obligation but intention. Come by, she typed. Front doors open. Moments later she heard it creak. Light footsteps. She didn't turn around. He entered quietly, holding a covered dish wrapped in a towel. Chili, Derek said. Not gourmet, but it does the job. She smiled without facing him. You didn't need an excuse. His silence behind her was charged. When she turned, she found him already looking at her. Not with hunger, but with understanding. A kind of patience that felt more dangerous than any direct advance. Claire placed the wine glass on the counter. Hungry? Derek shook his head slowly. I didn't come for food. The air shifted. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to pulse against her skin. She moved past him to the dining table, lighting a single candle more out of reflex than reason. They sat opposite each other, the flame flickering between them. They spoke sparingly, both knowing the words weren't the point. He asked her how long she'd been feeling alone. She didn't lie. He didn't judge. And when she reached for her glass, her fingers brushed his. Just like last time. This time neither pulled away. Claire set the glass down, the wine untouched. Derek leaned in just slightly. You don't have to explain anything, Claire. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe I want to. He waited. She stared down at her hands, then back up. I tried to be everything Brian needed. Supportive, flexible, patient. But somewhere along the way I disappeared. And he didn't notice. The confession hung between them. Derek reached across the table. His hand covered hers. Not possessive, not forceful. Just present. Claire's throat tightened. Her instinct told her to pull back, to retreat into the shell she'd carefully constructed. But she didn't. Instead she stood up. So did he. Neither spoke. There were no clever lines or lingering glances. Just the quiet rhythm of footsteps as Claire turned and walked down the hallway. Slow, uncertain, but not alone. At the threshold of her bedroom, she hesitated. Then, without looking back, she opened the door. She felt him behind her. She didn't need to check. The warmth of his presence was unmistakable. Inside the room was dim. Only the soft glow of a bedside lamp lit the edges, casting their shapes into soft silhouettes. The kind of light that made everything feel like memory, even as it was happening. Claire sat at the edge of the bed. Derek stayed where he was, waiting, respectful. But his eyes were locked on hers. She didn't ask him to come closer. She simply reached out. He crossed the space in a single breath. There were no urgent moves, no rushed embraces. Just fingers tracing skin like maps long forgotten. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. A mutual understanding that words would only dilute the honesty of the moment. Claire closed her eyes. She didn't want to think. She only wanted to feel. The softness of his touch. The strength in the way he held her. The warmth spreading through her body where coldness had lived too long. For the first time in years she felt seen, not just looked at. Not evaluated or compared or tolerated. Time blurred. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the room everything slowed. Every breath, every heartbeat, every surrender. Morning crept in slowly, like it knew it didn't belong there. Claire stirred beneath the sheets, blinking into the soft daylight pooling through the curtains. The room was quiet again, eerily so. Her body still carried the weight of the night before, the warmth of skin against skin, the ghost of his breath on her shoulder. She turned. The space beside her was empty. Derek was gone. Only a slight indentation on the mattress remained, and a folded towel on the edge of the bed. No note, no goodbye. Just a silence even deeper than the one before. Claire sat up, wrapping the sheet around her like armor. The air felt heavier in daylight. Every detail of the room suddenly sharper. The curve of the wine glass on the nightstand, the candle wax hardened in place, the faint scent of cologne that didn't belong to her husband. For a moment, guilt flickered behind her ribs. Not because of what had happened, but because of how right it had felt. That was the most unsettling part. She moved slowly through the house, each step echoing a little too loud. In the kitchen, the dish Derek brought sat rinsed in the sink, neatly placed to dry. He had cleaned up after himself like he had only borrowed her time, not stolen anything. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Brian. Picture from the airport lounge. He was smiling with a coffee in hand and a message that read, "Delayed again. I'll be back late tomorrow. Miss you." Claire stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't type. Not yet. She looked out the window. Across the street, Derek's truck was parked, exactly where it always was. Curtains closed. Driveway wet with the last of the night's rain. So close. So unreachable. She thought about last night, not the way it started but the way it felt. How she had been held like she mattered. How, for one fleeting night, the ache in her chest had quieted. And yet now the ache returned. Not because she regretted it, but because she didn't know what to do next. The sound of the microwave pulled her back. She hadn't touched the coffee Brian made before leaving, but this morning she brewed her own. She stood in silence as it heated, the hum of the appliance and the ticking of the wall clock filling the kitchen like filler words in an uncomfortable conversation. By the time she sat at the table, coffee in hand, she realized she wasn't waiting for anything anymore. No apology, no justification. She had crossed the line. And the strange part was, she didn't feel ruined. She felt awakened. A knock came at the door. Her heart caught in her throat. For a second she thought it might be him. Returning. Saying something, anything, that would tell her this wasn't a one-time thing, that it hadn't just lived in the shadows of a storm. But it was just the mailman. Claire opened the door, signed without thinking, and returned to the kitchen. The wind outside had settled, but inside her, something still stirred. She glanced at her phone once more. Then, with deliberate calm, she typed back to Brian. "Hope your flight home is safe. Let me know when you land." That was it. She didn't say she missed him. She didn't pretend. Because today, pretending felt heavier than the truth. As she stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hands, she whispered words only she could hear. "Last night doesn't change everything. But it reminded me I still exist." And somehow that was enough for now.